Hello and welcome to this special edition of Vantage. We are coming to you live from the White House. There's a lull here in Washington, D.C. right now. The action is over, but behind the scenes, there is a lot that's happening. Donald Trump's chosen his chief of staff. It is Susie Wiles, the woman who ran his election campaign. It is Trump's first major appointment. There will be more in the days to come. Meanwhile, the Democrats are divided. They're still figuring out why they lost. Yesterday, Joe Biden addressed the nation. He called for unity. But it's a difficult time for America that is divided along so many lines, including education. We'll tell you more about that on the show tonight. Also, what role did podcasts and social media play in this election? Meanwhile, the Canada-India row has escalated. New Delhi has slammed Ottawa for blocking an Australian outlet that carried Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar's interview. Why is India talking to the Taliban? Israeli football fans were attacked in Amsterdam. What led to this? In Germany, the government has collapsed. We'll tell you why. Pakistan is battling record-breaking pollution and blaming India for it. And why a deal between the Indian military and Uber is sparking concerns. All this and more coming up on the show. First up, the headlines. Russia refuses to confirm if Kim Jong-un's troops are fighting alongside its army, but Ukrainian president claims deadly clashes with North Korean soldiers in Kursk. The West and South Korea say that Pyongyang has sent more than 10,000 troops to Moscow. China unveils sweeping local government debt swap to lift its ailing economy. This is one of Beijing's most ambitious plans in years. The International Monetary Fund says local governments in China face a debt burden of more than $8 trillion. The move comes amid trade tensions with the US. Mauritius to head to polls on Sunday. The election has been overshadowed by a wiretapping scandal. The Prime Minister's hopes of an easy re-election have been dealt a big blow after secretly recorded phone calls of politicians, diplomats and journalists were leaked online last month. A ship carrying possibly toxic industrial waste docks at an Albanian port. The containers had left Albania in July for Thailand, but it was refused entry. The processing of industrial waste from the West in developing countries is a multi-billion-dollar business. And the first artwork by a humanoid robot sells for more than $1 million. It is a portrait of an English mathematician made by the world's first ultra-realistic robot artist. The robot resembles a woman with a face, large eyes, and a brown wig. America is bracing for Trump 2.0, an older but more powerful Donald Trump. It's a strange situation here because usually elections have a finality to them. You forget the divisions and the debate, you get down to work. But around here, it's the opposite. The Democrats simply cannot wrap their heads around what happened. A bit like in 2016, they're not ready to accept a Trump presidency. And don't get me wrong, they're not storming the US Capitol, but there is a sense of denial. Yesterday, President Joe Biden tried to address that. He gave a speech from the White House. He promised a smooth and professional transition. But beyond that, he gave an important message too. You can't love your country only when you win. Listen to this.
Yesterday, I spoke with President-elect Trump to congratulate him on his victory. And I assured him that I would direct my entire administration to work with his team to ensure a peaceful and orderly transition. We accept the choice the country made. I've said many times, you can't love your country only when you win. You can't love your neighbor only when you agree. We all get knocked down. But the measure of our character, as my dad would say, is how quickly we get back up. Remember, a defeat does not mean we are defeated. We lost this battle.
I know it's the bare minimum, but it was a very mature and graceful address from Joe Biden, especially if you look at the history. In 2020, when Biden won, Trump did not extend him this courtesy. He disputed the election results. Clearly, Joe Biden wants to be the bigger man. But here's the problem. A lot of Democrats blame him for the loss. They blame his policy on Israel, his decision to not step aside earlier, and his campaign gaffes. The White House spokesperson faced some of these questions later in the day. Listen to her response.
Running again, not stepping aside faster, and showing what some people say, quoting folks here, an arrogance of believing he was the only one who could beat Donald Trump.
You said something at the end that I do want to just kind of reiterate and remind folks, and it was a good reminder to me, which is like, look, this is the president who has been the only person has been able to beat Donald Trump.
It's a strange moment for Joe Biden. He must defend his record. He can't blame his vice president, and he must be courteous to Donald Trump. Not an easy balance to strike. And don't forget, he's still got a country to run. Trump will take charge only on the 20th of January. Until then, Joe Biden must handle 2 wars while preparing his country for a second Trump presidency. It's not going to be easy. Americans are deeply divided over this result. We've seen celebrations by Trump supporters across America, but we've also seen protests. Take a look at this. And what is Trump up to? His cabinet is slowly starting to take shape. He's already picked his chief of staff, a political strategist from Florida, Susie Wiles. She was co-chair of the Trump campaign, and she will now run Donald Trump's White House. Wiles will be the first woman to hold this post. And what do we know about her? Well, she's a longtime Republican. She worked on Ronald Reagan's campaign, on Donald Trump's first campaign, and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' campaign. She likes to stay behind the scenes. On Wednesday, Trump called her up to the podium to say a few words, but she flatly refused. Insiders say she ran a professional campaign, which can be hard with Trump because he rarely sticks to a given script or agenda. But her biggest challenge starts now. Trump ran through 4 chiefs of staff in his first term. One of them later called him a fascist. Plus, this Trump team will be more volatile. The likes of Elon Musk and Tucker Carlson will be jostling for influence. So Susie Wiles needs to keep them in line. As for Donald Trump, he's ready to hit the ground running. Yesterday, he spoke to the U.S. media. He said around 70 world leaders, 70 world leaders had spoken to him. That's a lot of phone calls in 2 days. But his focus remains on domestic issues, especially his promises on the southern border with Mexico. Listen to what he said.
We obviously have to make the border strong and powerful, and we have to at the same time. We want people to come into our country. When people have killed and murdered, when drug lords have destroyed countries, and now they're going to go back to those countries because they're not staying here.
He wants people to come, but legally, which is a fair ask, but that's not his only border promise. Trump has vowed the largest deportation in U.S. history. He wants to round up illegal migrants and send them back to their home country. And how many people are we talking about? There is no official number, but some reports say it could be as many as 11 million people. 11 million. Now, this raises a couple of questions. One, how do you find, round up, and detain so many people? And 2, how much will it cost? Democrats have painted a grim picture about this plan. They say migrants will be put up in detention camps, but Trump allies say it will be targeted. No citywide or neighborhood sweeps. Either way, logistics will be a nightmare, which brings us to the costs. In 2016, the cost of deporting an illegal migrant was almost $13,000. That's apprehension plus detention plus processing and finally flying them out. Trump was asked about the viability of such a program. He says the price tag doesn't matter. But expect political challenges. Trump will need the help of all departments and U.S. states for such a program, and chances are he won't get it. Some states are Trump-proofing their laws, like California, New York, Massachusetts, and Washington. California's governor, Gavin Newsom, is planning to convene his lawmakers. He plans to fight Trump's proposed policies. And how is that? By giving more money to his attorney general. Basically, California is lawyering up. They want to fight Trump's proposed laws in court, or at least hold them up. Other Democratic states are doing the same, so expect some standoffs next year. A few federal officials could also clash with Trump, like Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. He heads America's central bank. Trump had appointed Powell back in 2018. He got a second term from Joe Biden. Now, Powell was asked if he would resign if Trump asked him to. And his response? A defiant no.
Some of the president-elect's advisors have suggested that you should resign. If he asked you to leave, would you go?
No.
Can you follow up on, do you think that legally you're not required to leave?
No.
Legally, Trump cannot fire him. Powell's term lasts until May 2026. He is protected by the US Constitution, but expect some public acrimony and tensions because last time Trump clashed repeatedly with him. The president wanted to cut interest rates. Jerome Powell said, not the right time. Trump also threatened to fire him on many occasions, including in the middle of the pandemic. So considering all of this, one thing is certain, America is set for a dramatic 4 years. Trump could have absolute power in Washington, but he will face pushbacks from states and federal officials. How that plays out will depend on the president. Leaders around the world are preparing themselves for Donald Trump's return. Some countries are worried, including traditional US allies and, of course, America's enemies. But there are also other feelings going around, like hope and even excitement. So let's look at some of these reactions, starting with Russia. Here's what Russian President Vladimir Putin said.
First of all, I can tell you, his behavior at the moment of the attempt on his life impressed me. He turned out to be a courageous man. A person shows himself in extraordinary circumstances. This is where a person shows himself. And he showed himself, in my opinion, in a very correct way, courageously like a man. I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate him on his election as President of the United States. I have already said that we will work with any head of state that the American people have given them the mandate. This will indeed be the case in practice.
Putin has made his first public remarks on Trump's victory. He began by praising Donald Trump, calling him courageous for reacting the way he did after the attempt on his life. Putin then congratulated Trump on his election win and said that he would be willing to work with the incoming US president. Basically, Putin is open to resetting ties with the United States, but the ball is in Trump's court. Russia is waiting to see what he does once he takes office. And Putin isn't the only American adversary who reacted this way. There was also Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro.
We did not do well in the first administration of re-elected President Donald Trump. It is a new beginning for us to bet on winning and for the United States and Venezuela to do well. We always advocate for Latin America and the Caribbean to do well. As much as there have been tensions in relations when they tried to attempt against Trump's life twice, I do not hesitate for a second to express my solidarity and wish him good health and a long life.
Maduro acknowledged that he did not share a good relationship with Trump, not during his first term anyway. The two were at loggerheads. Trump exerted massive pressure on Venezuela, hoping for Maduro's ouster. But despite this, Maduro sees this as a new beginning, a new win-win relationship with Donald Trump. Maduro also mentioned the assassination attempts. He expressed solidarity with Trump and wished him a long life. It's quite the shift in tone. So both Russia and Venezuela are looking for a reset. Now look at the third reaction from Argentina.
I congratulate President-elect Donald Trump for the great victory in the elections held yesterday. You know that you can count on Argentina to make the United States great again, and we know that we can count on you to make Argentina great again. I wish you the greatest success. Success and blessings. Long live freedom.
That was Javier Milei, the president of Argentina. Milei could not be happier with this result. He had backed Trump from the very beginning. Milei sees him as a natural ally, so he's thrilled. And he isn't even waiting for Trump's inauguration. He's flying to the US next week to meet Donald Trump at his Mar-a-Lago residence and congratulate him in person. Joining them will be a mutual friend, Elon Musk. Musk has backed both these leaders, so he may be able to help strengthen ties. That's what Javier Milei will be hoping anyway. It seems there are good days ahead for Argentina. Another leader thrilled about Trump is Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. Last month, Orbán said that he would celebrate Trump's victory with several bottles of champagne. Yesterday, he gave an update.
I only partially kept my promise. We also opened champagne, but I was in Kyrgyzstan when Donald Trump won. But there the customs are different. That's why we happily tapped the vodka set together, being happy with this fantastic result.
Úgyhogy a vodka készletet csapoltuk meg.
Orbán was hosting a summit yesterday, a summit of the European political community. Hungary has the European Union's rotating presidency right now. Now, EU leaders were meeting to discuss the US election and decide on what Europe should do next. Most EU leaders were worried, but Orbán was not. He didn't even try to hide his excitement. Orbán has been at odds with most of Europe for a while now. He has opposed the war in Russia, the excessive dependence on the US, and a number of other policies. His outlook is more aligned with Trump than Europe. Now, this was a weakness in the past, but now Orbán's influence is set to increase. So obviously, he was quite happy. But the rest of Europe definitely is not. They know that things are about to change.
Like many, I had the opportunity yesterday to speak to the President-elect Donald Trump. Some of us around this table know him from 4 years ago in his previous position. I congratulated him, but basically I think that our role here, in the European Union, is not to comment on the election of Donald Trump, to wonder if it is good or not. The question is, are we ready to defend the interests of Europeans? That is the only question that we should ask ourselves. And for me, I think that is our priority.
Europe is preparing for less help from the US, maybe no help in the Ukraine war. Trump says he wants the war to end. Europe does not want Russia to gain territory, so it wants to keep backing Kiev. But will they be able to? We'll probably see soon enough. Trump's victory has shaken up the world. Old foes are hoping for resets. Old allies are preparing to go it alone. And only one thing is certain at the moment. Nothing can be taken for granted. Which brings us back to the United States. The electorate here is divided by race, by gender, by where you stay, and by your ideology. And these divisions are quite stark. Yet there's one factor that is often ignored, and that is education. America has around 335 million people. Only 37% have a bachelor's degree or higher. Only 37%. 28% have only completed high school. 9% don't even have a high school diploma. So there is an education gap in this country, and it decides who they vote for. For example, take the data from this election. The states with higher education levels voted for Kamala Harris. The ones with lower education levels voted for Donald Trump. That is what numbers say. 55% college-educated voters backed the Democrats. 56% without degrees backed the Republicans. So there is a clear divide. And even the parties have noticed it. Look at this statement. It is by Democrat Bernie Sanders. He slammed his party for the loss, but one line stands out in his statement. It should come as no great surprise that a Democratic Party which has abandoned working class people should find that the working class has abandoned them. In 2008, the working class voted overwhelmingly for Barack Obama. They were a key voter base for the Democrats, but that's changed since 2016. Working class voters now prefer Donald Trump. Meanwhile, highly educated professionals used to vote Republican. This time, they voted for Harris. So the demographic has flipped, and you can understand why. America is dealing with growing inequality. Like I told you, only 37% of the population are college graduates, yet they hold 70% of the wealth. For every $1 a college graduate earns, a high school graduate earns only 22 cents, which makes education the new fault line. It's impacting American politics, yet opinion polls seem to keep missing it. Over the last few months, there have been a lot of polls by different outlets and groups, and all of them predicted a close battle, a neck-and-neck fight, yet the results are quite the opposite. Trump won by a landslide. He swept the swing states. Now, we get that no poll can be absolutely accurate. There's always a margin of error, but this was not a margin of error. They got it completely wrong, and not for the first time either. In 2016, polls predicted an overwhelming victory for Hillary Clinton, yet it was Donald Trump who won. In 2020, polls predicted a win for Biden, which was correct, but there was an issue. The margin was far narrower than expected. Pollsters again underestimated support for Trump, and this time too, they couldn't get it right. So is the system broken? Why do polls keep getting it wrong? Let's look at how they're conducted. Pollsters first create sample sizes, then they ask their questions either on ground or online. The data is collected and analyzed, and this analysis shapes opinion poll results. That's how it's done. It sounds very scientific, but the problem arises when your bias comes into play, or when people haven't given you honest answers, or you gloss over key indicators like education. For 3 elections, pollsters have missed crucial pockets of voters. That's the rural, white, working class. Non-educated voters aren't well represented in most samples, and they're pivotal in Trump's victory. The method, too, is not fail-proof. Many pollsters use only online surveys now, but they aren't very reliable. Usually, the answers come from more educated voters, plus random samples are not always accurate. Now, they could be very wrong, which they've been for 12 years now. So it's time for a rethink, perhaps, for the pollsters, for the Democrats, and for the whole of America. They may pretend that the diploma divide does not exist, but at this point, it is dictating American politics. This election wasn't just Harris versus Trump, it was also a media war, sort of like old media versus new media. Let me explain this. Most newspapers and TV channels backed Kamala Harris. Some of them openly endorsed her. You can call this the old media. On the other side, you had newer forms like social media or podcast. They were decisively in Donald Trump's corner. X and Elon Musk supported him. So did podcaster Joe Rogan. The question is, did this impact the election result? Let's take a closer look. The average age of cable news audience is 70 in America. Among newspaper readers, it is 60, the average age, and magazines, 52. What about podcasts? 34 years is the average age. So the trend is quite clear. Older Americans use newspapers and television, younger Americans use podcasts. Within this age group, men are a bigger share, and Trump realized this. Earlier this year, his campaign manager hired a 27-year-old consultant. His job? To make a list of podcasts for Trump to go on. Apparently, Trump wanted his son Barron to go through this list. And Barron is just 18 years old. He studies at New York University. So Trump wanted him, an 18-year-old, to vet the list. After that, it was a podcast blitz. Look at all the shows that he went on. The Nelk Boys podcast, Lex Friedman podcast, Bussin' with the Boys, Flagrant podcast, the Logan Paul podcast, the Theo Vaughn podcast, and finally, Joe Rogan. Together, these videos got 86 million views, and I'm only counting the full interviews. If you add shorter clips and snippets, it will be a lot more. And these are not like your regular TV interviews. The focus isn't on policy or politics. It's a freewheeling conversation. Trump talked about martial arts, about aliens, about the Kennedy assassination, about boxing, and about cryptocurrency. Issues that resonate with young American men. 2 weeks ago, he appeared on a podcast called 6 Feet Under, and guess who hosts it? WWE's Undertaker. I know it's a strategy that does not seem to make sense, but as the result shows, it did. The Trump campaign realized 2 things early on. One, young people watch podcasts. We're talking about people under 30. They make up 37% of the US population. If you want their vote, you need to reach out to them. And 2, mainstream media isn't what it used to be. Trust in US media is at a historic low. Only 31% Americans trust these newspapers or channels. So Trump thought, why should I even speak to them? I would much rather speak to podcasters and look at the results. In 2020, Biden beat Trump among men under 30 years of age, that too by 11%. But this time, Trump beat Harris by 2%. So clearly the outreach has worked. In his victory speech, Trump gave a shout out to podcasters. Listen to this.
I want to thank some of the guys. You know, we have up here today the U.S. Open champion. He's a fantastic golfer. He's slightly longer than me. It's a little bit longer than me. Just a little bit. Bryson DeChambeau is up here someplace. And we also have a Mandana White who has done some job.
I want to thank some people real quick. I want to thank the Nelk Boys, Aiden Ross, Theo Vaughn, Bussin' with the Boys, and last but not least, the mighty and powerful Joe Rogan.
Again, Trump read the room well. You may remember the controversy around his 60 Minutes interview. Harris did take part in it, but Trump refused to. It was seen as some sort of blasphemous act. Though as it turned out, it was inconsequential. Harris too tried to get on the podcast train. She went on a show called Call Her Daddy. She was also reportedly considering an interview with Joe Rogan, but in the end it did not happen. Now, I know this sounds like a masterstroke by Donald Trump. You may think, well, this is the future. If you want to win, get on podcasts. But here's the problem. There are no filters on these conversations, no fact checks, no follow-up questions, and no red lines. You can basically say whatever you want and get away with it. In an ideal world, the audience would be careful. They would verify claims and fact-check big statements, but let's face it, very few people do it. So what's the solution? Well, the responsibility lies with each party. Politicians are free to go on podcasts, but they are not substitutes for a proper interview. They never will be. Secondly, the audience must be more careful. You have internet on your fingertips. Use it to verify facts. Just because someone has a podcast mic, it doesn't make them right. And finally, the media. American mainstream media is among the richest in the world. They have the resources, they have the talent pool. So why doesn't the public trust them? Clearly something has gone wrong somewhere. You can't just blame Donald Trump for all of it and for capitalizing on this trend. He's a master of the media, whether it's cable or social media or now podcasts. Let's turn to Canada now. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has always called himself a protector of free speech. He's used this argument to ignore a lot of things, like Khalistani separatism, security threats to diplomats, and glorification of political assassinations. Through all of this, we had the same question. Where does he draw the red line? Well, we have the answer now. The Indian Foreign Minister's speech is where the line is drawn. That's where freedom of expression ends for Justin Trudeau. Let me explain. Minister Jaishankar was in Australia this week. On Tuesday, he held a press conference with the Australian Foreign Minister. As expected, he was asked about Canada. And as expected, Jaishankar hit out at them. What happened next is quite interesting. Most Australian outlets covered this presser. Among them was Australia Today. They focus on Indian diaspora news in Australia. Hours after they carried this presser, Australia Today was blocked in Canada. The reason? Listen to India's Foreign Ministry.
We understand that the social media handles and pages of this particular outlet, which is an important diaspora outlet, has been blocked and are not available for viewers in Canada. This happened just a few hours after this particular handle carried the press conference of External Affairs Minister along with Penny Wong. But nonetheless, what I will say that these are actions which yet again highlight the hypocrisy of Canada towards freedom of speech.
Well, so much for freedom of speech. You're okay with people threatening to blow up planes. You're okay with threats to Indian diplomats. But this is where you draw the line. It exposes Canada's hypocrisy. Let me take you back to July last year. Khalistanis in Canada displayed a float on Indira Gandhi's assassination. They glorified the killing of an Indian Prime Minister. Around the same time, Indian diplomatic missions were targeted. A grenade was hurled at the High Commission of India. And how did Justin Trudeau react? Listen in.
Canada has always taken extremely seriously violence and threats of violence. We've always taken serious action against terrorism, and we always will. We have an extremely diverse country, and freedom of expression is something that we have.
So all that counts as freedom of expression, but covering the Indian Foreign Minister's speech does not. Australia Today has responded to this censorship. Let me quote from what they've said. The recent restriction and ban on our interview with Indian External Affairs Minister and the press conference under orders from the Canadian government have been difficult for our team and those who value freedom, free and open journalism. We remain steadfast in our mission to bring important stories and voices to the public, undeterred by these obstacles. And what is Canada saying? Nothing so far, but I'm sure you're wondering what Minister Jaishankar said. What was so explosive that Canada had to block his remarks? Nothing out of the ordinary. Exactly what India has been saying all along. A, Canada has not given evidence, and B, that Indian diplomats are not safe there.
Canada has developed a pattern of making allegations without providing specifics. Secondly, when we look at Canada, for us, the fact that they're putting our diplomats under surveillance is something which is unacceptable. Third, the incidents which the gentleman there spoke about, and do look at the video. I think they would tell you, in a way, the political space today, which is being given to extremist forces there.
It's a genuine problem. So much so that India is scaling back its diplomatic activities. The High Commission and consulates often organize special camps. These are meant for Indian nationals. You can use these camps for various services, maybe passport issues or maybe official certificates. One such camp was slated to be organized in Toronto, but it has now been cancelled because Canada cannot provide adequate security. We saw that on Sunday too. A camp was being held at a Hindu temple in Brampton. Khalistanis attacked the temple and the devotees. So New Delhi is not risking a repeat. This caps a very tumultuous week in India-Canada ties. We thought it hit rock bottom last month, but things are getting even worse. And what is Justin Trudeau doing about it? On Monday, he attended a Diwali event in Ottawa. There he made an important statement.
There are many supporters of Khalistan in Canada, but they do not represent the Sikh community as a whole. There are many supporters of the Modi government in Canada, but they do not represent all Hindu Canadians as a whole.
Now, a couple of things to note here. One, he admits that there are Khalistanis in Canada. He also says that there is no room for violence. So why not crack down on them? Why not punish them for spreading chaos? No answers. And secondly, this is an important distinction drawn by Trudeau. He has said that Khalistanis do not represent Sikhs. Well, news flash, Mr. Prime Minister. We already know that. People at the event said that Trudeau had never made such a statement before, distinguishing Sikhs and Khalistanis. Does this mean that he's slowly realizing his mistake? Or did someone give him a history crash course? Either way, don't hold your breath. Justin Trudeau is too deep in this mess. Even if he realizes his mistake, he cannot afford to accept it. Our next story is also about India. It's about neighborhood ties. Earlier this week, an Indian delegation was in Afghanistan. They had a meeting with the Taliban. They met two high-level Taliban officials, the acting Foreign Minister, Amir Khan Muttaqi, and the acting Defence Minister, Mullah Mohammad Yaqub Mujahid. India was represented by J.P. Singh. He is India's point person for Afghanistan, the Joint Secretary of the Pakistan-Afghanistan-Iran Division in the Ministry of External Affairs. Now, Singh's visit was not highly publicized, but it became big news after the Taliban posted these pictures showing Singh with Mullah Yaqub. The Taliban say that both sides declared their common desire to enlarge bilateral relations. The focus was on humanitarian cooperation, but some other issues were also discussed, like trade and visas for Afghan people. Before we go into the details, some background first. As you know, the Taliban took over Afghanistan in 2021 and most countries severed ties with Afghanistan. Most of the world has refused to officially recognize the Taliban regime. India hasn't recognized it either, but that does not mean that New Delhi won't talk to them. India has historical ties with Afghanistan and the Afghan people. Forgetting that is not an option. And New Delhi won't abandon the people there. Then there's geopolitics to consider. Pakistan had initially supported the Taliban. They harbored Taliban militants who were fighting against the US-backed administration in Kabul. Islamabad initially expected the Taliban to join forces with them, which would have been bad news for India. So New Delhi made sure to keep communication channels with Kabul open. Then there's the China factor. China wants to exploit Afghanistan's resources, so it maintains ties with the Taliban too. That also could have ended badly. But New Delhi prevented this by keeping diplomatic back channels open. That is how India could hold this week's meeting. Here's what India's External Affairs Ministry said about the talks.
During the visit, he had several meetings with the Afghan minister, including with the acting defense minister. He also called on former President Hamid Karzai. He also met the head of UN agencies there and several other senior ministers. They had discussions on the India's humanitarian assistance that we're providing to people in Afghanistan, as also how the Chabahar port can be utilized by the business community in Afghanistan for transactions and for export and import and any other thing that they would like to do for.
As usual, humanitarian aid was on top of the agenda. But now New Delhi is also talking about trade via the Chabahar port in Iran. Remember, India is developing this port. It allows India to bypass Pakistan and access Iran, Afghanistan and beyond. Now, India wants to use this access to help the Afghan people. The Afghan business community has been invited to use the Chabahar port to expand their operations and to bring prosperity to their country. The Indian team discussed this with the Taliban. They said negotiations will take place in the near future between technical delegations from regional countries, including Afghanistan and India. So it looks like New Delhi is trying to help the Afghans while also making the Chabahar port more profitable. It's a win-win situation. Then there's the visa situation. The Taliban took over in 2021 and Indian diplomats were evacuated from Afghanistan. Some junior diplomats have returned since, but they still don't issue visas. This has been a setback for thousands of Afghans, especially students who go to Indian colleges. The Afghan students have not been able to enter India for years now, so New Delhi has said it will look into this. That's the latest update on the India-Taliban talks. New Delhi is working to help the Afghan people make their lives better through aid and trade and prevent their country from falling under Pakistan's control. Moving on to Amsterdam, where Israeli football fans were attacked in violent clashes. On Thursday, Israel's Maccabi Tel Aviv was playing Dutch side Ajax. Israeli fans went to watch this match. They were ambushed, they were beaten up. 5 of them are in hospital. Many of them are injured. The Dutch police have called it an anti-Semitic attack. Israel has condemned these attacks. Prime Minister Netanyahu has called them, and I'm quoting, horrifying. He vowed to send rescue planes to bring Israeli citizens back. Our next report brings you more details.
It was supposed to be a game of football, yet it turned into a night of horror for Amsterdam. It was a Europa League football match between Maccabi Tel Aviv and the Dutch club Ajax. It was taking place at the Johan Cruyff Arena. Fans left the stadium without any incident, but as the night progressed, things got worse. Israeli fans say they were confronted by a mob of Arab protesters. They were ambushed, even beaten up. Unverified videos show men demanding that a fan say, "Free Palestine."
Free Palestine now! Free Palestine!
5 Israeli fans were in the hospital. They have since been discharged. Nearly 30 others were injured.
We have nothing to do with the war. We come to support Maccabi Tel Aviv, and we got shit.
62 people were initially arrested. 10 still remain in custody. They're all being investigated by a special police team. According to the Amsterdam mayor, men on scooters searched for Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters in the streets and carried out what she called hit-and-run attacks.
Amsterdam looks back on a pitch-black night, and it is still dark today. Hateful anti-Semitic rioters and criminals attacked and beat up Jewish, Israeli visitors to our city last night. My heart goes out to the victims, to their families here and in Israel. Boys on scooters crossed the city in search of Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters. It was a hit and run.
Mijn hart gaat uit naar de slachtoffers. But what led to these violent clashes in the first place? Amsterdam authorities say that tensions have been rising for some time now. Nearly 3,000 Maccabi fans traveled to the city for this match. They were seen chanting racist slogans, both about Arabs and Palestine. One even climbed a building to tear down a Palestinian flag. There were also attacks on a taxi. So, with the situation escalating, the police cancelled a pro-Palestinian demonstration. It was supposed to happen near the stadium. Extra police have been deployed in Amsterdam. The security measures will continue for the coming days as a precaution. The Dutch Prime Minister has denounced the attack.
This is anti-Semitic violence, and those are the words I choose every time, and I do that very consciously. Or that against the background of the Israeli conflict with Palestine, that will undoubtedly play a role in it, but I actually do not think that is important at this time. It is anti-Semitic violence.
Israel, on the other hand, is furious. President Isaac Herzog condemned the clashes, comparing it to a pogrom. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called it horrifying. He first ordered rescue planes for Israeli citizens, but Israel has since cancelled that mission. it'll now send commercial planes to the Netherlands to bring football fans back home. Authorities have urged Israelis in Amsterdam to stay in their hotels. Meanwhile, Maccabi Tel Aviv has warned its fans and asked them to avoid wearing Jewish symbols. Anti-Semitic incidents have surged in the Netherlands since the Gaza war began last October. Many Jewish organizations have reported threats. Schools too have received hate mail. These clashes in Amsterdam have led to criticism from across the globe. It comes just a day ahead of the marking of Kristallnacht, a Nazi pogrom against Jews across Germany.
Now let's turn our attention to Germany. The country is in chaos. It no longer has a functional government. Just hours after Donald Trump won the US election, Germany's governing coalition collapsed. Chancellor Olaf Scholz kicked out one of his coalition partners. He now runs a minority government. It is not a sustainable solution. The opposition is calling for him to step down. The people of Germany also want elections immediately, but Scholz is trying to delay the polls. He wants to hold on to power till March and shore up his popularity. Our next report has the details.
Political chaos has engulfed Germany. Their ruling coalition has collapsed. Chancellor Olaf Scholz now heads a minority government. But he's refusing to call snap elections. Instead, he wants to ride out the storm for a few months and try to get his popularity up before finally calling for an election. The move leaves Germany in a state of flux, which is the last thing both the country and Europe in general need right now. All this chaos began on Wednesday, just hours after another major political event: Donald Trump's victory in the United States. It was already a tense situation for Europe, but Germany decided to turn up the chaos levels further. Perhaps the stress got to Scholz and he snapped.
Meine Damen und Herren,
Ladies and gentlemen, I have just asked the president for the dismissal of the finance minister. Too many times did finance minister Lindner block laws irrelevantly. Too many times did he act to serve his clientele and party. Especially today, on a day with such an important event such as the US election. Such egotism is completely incomprehensible.
Scholz sacked his finance minister Christian Lindner, and he kicked Lindner's Free Democratic Party out of the ruling coalition. Scholz became Germany's chancellor in 2021, heading what was known as the Traffic Light Coalition. It was a coalition of three parties: the Social Democratic Party of Germany, which Scholz belongs to. Their color is red. Lindner's Free Democratic Party, represented by the color yellow, and Germany's Green Party, which was obviously green. Hence, it was called the Traffic Light Coalition. But now, yellow is out. Only red and green are left and running a minority government. They just control 324 seats in the German parliament out of 733. In most countries, the government would get toppled. The opposition would call for a no-confidence vote and force the leader to resign. But it doesn't work that way in Germany. In Germany, the chancellor decides when to call a confidence vote.
In the very first week of the parliamentary session in the new year, I will call for the confidence vote so that the Bundestag can then vote on it on January 15th. That way, parliamentarians can decide if they want to pave the way for a snap election. That election could then take place at the latest by the end of March while respecting the rules of the Constitution.
Scholz has given himself a 4-month extension. He will continue to run a minority government until polls are held. Scholz's decision has left the opposition furious.
I relayed my conversation with the Chancellor yesterday to the parliamentary group and also made clear that we parted in disagreement. The Chancellor did not see himself in a position to give me a plausible explanation as to why he would only call a vote of confidence in another 2 months and not next week.
That was the leader of Germany's biggest opposition party, the Christian Democratic Union. The CDU is leading in opinion polls and they are poised to take over if elections are held now. But Scholz has his own agenda. He plans to use the next few months to pass laws with outside support because he doesn't have a majority. The CDU suspects that Scholz will pass populist laws that will boost his chances in the polls. It's a cynical strategy, but there's not much the opposition can do about it, which means Germany will be an unstable government for the next few months.
When does it become difficult to breathe? According to the Air Quality Index, when the digits hit 300, an AQI of 300 is hazardous. Push it to 500 and the air quality is considered off the charts. Do you know the recent air quality in Pakistan's Lahore? 1900. This is a historic high, an AQI of 1900. Lahore has become the most polluted city on earth. Hundreds of people have been hospitalized. So what is Pakistan doing about it? They're scrambling for band-aids, like closing schools for a few days, impounding polluting vehicles, tearing down kilns, and of course, blaming India. Here is a report.
Tearing down kilns, shutting barbecue joints, impounding polluting vehicles, banning rickshaws, closing schools, forcing workers to stay home, hospitalizing hundreds. This is the state of Pakistan, as record-breaking pollution chokes the country.
आप फैक्ट्रीज को नहीं पकड़ती हैं, आप इंडस्ट्रीज को नहीं पकड़ती हैं, आप धुआं छोड़ने वाली गाड़ियों को नहीं पकड़ती हैं। इन तमाम चीज़ों के ऊपर काबू पाए बगैर तालीमी इदारों को बंद कर देना ये कोई सलूशन नहीं है। हाँ, हम ये बात भी समझते हैं कि बच्चों की जो सेहत है वो बहुत ज़रूरी है। ना सिर्फ बच्चे बल्कि बड़े भी इससे मुतासिर हो रही हैं और इसके साथ साथ माहिरीन के मुताबिक बच्चों इन लोगों की 5 साल उम्र की कम हो रही हैं।
बच्चा बस बाहरों आया ते घर ਉਹਨੂੰ ਘਬਰਾਹਟ ਜੀ ਮਹਿਸੂਸ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ੍ਹ ਦਾ ਮੌਸਮ ਚੱਲਿਆ ਹੈ ਸਮੋਗ ਦਾ ਤੇ ਬਸ ਉਵੇਂ ਹੀ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਚੱਕਰ ਆਉਣ ਲੱਗ ਪੈਣੇ ਤੈਨੂੰ ਫਟਾਫਟ ਅਸੀਂ ਹਸਪੀਟਲ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਏ ਹਾਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਤੇ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਚੈੱਕ ਕੀਤਾ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਵੀ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਇਹੀ ਮਸਲਾ ਮਹਿਸੂਸ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ ਤੇ
This is Punjab, the most populated province of Pakistan. It is home to 127 million people who are now being suffocated by this hazardous air. How bad is it? An air quality index above 300 is considered hazardous. Anything above 500 is considered off the charts. But on Sunday, Punjab's capital, Lahore, reported air quality of 1,900. This is a record high. Lahore has become the most polluted city on earth. On Tuesday, more than 900 people were hospitalized. On Wednesday, the city was still cloaked in toxic smog. So the government has set up a so-called smog war room, comprising of high-level staff to look into matters. And since then, they have ordered strict measures, like instructing half the workforce to stay home, mandating masks, demolishing brick kilns, shifting schools to remote learning, and shutting down public spaces like parks, zoos, and historical monuments. But these are band-aid last-minute solutions. The problem has not gone away. So Pakistan did what they do best: blame India. Pakistan's senior minister, Maryam Aurangzeb, said that the wind from India towards Lahore is taking smog to dangerous levels. Later, she took a more neutral tone, saying that the matter will be discussed with India. Last week, Pakistan's Punjab Chief Minister, Maryam Nawaz, shared a similar opinion. She proposed putting complex politics aside and called for smog diplomacy, saying that the air doesn't recognize borders between our two countries. It's impossible to fight smog unless both Punjabs take steps together. That's a lovely sentiment, but New Delhi says that India has not heard anything formally from Islamabad so far on this matter. So, was it all talk, no action? No one would put that past Islamabad. Northern India is also experiencing high levels of air pollution. New Delhi is the second most polluted city in the world.
Look at this, you cannot see even from here down 2 kilometers, you can't see anything. And people should understand. And authority also should understand that this is ridiculous. It is so difficult to breathe and run.
But the extreme air pollution in both the countries is caused by a confluence of factors, including crop burning in the winter harvest months, brick kilns that spew smoke, industrial activity, and car pollution. Last year, at least 235,000 people died from air pollution in Pakistan. In India, the deaths crossed 2 million. Economically, Pakistan loses about 6.5% of its GDP due to air pollution, and India, 3%. Both the countries are being choked. So, Pakistan should stop the blame game and for once not be a fair weather friend.
Now let's talk about Uber. It's practically a household name. Uber is an American transportation company mainly known for its ride-hailing services. Over the past year, Uber has signed multiple deals with Indian military bodies, the Air Force, the Navy and the Coast Guard, to provide transportation services for military personnel and their families. But these deals have run into trouble. Critics have flagged major security concerns, and now the agreements are being scrapped. So what were the risks? And do other countries have similar deals? Here's the report.
Uber is an American app-based cab-hailing company. It's used by millions across the world, and India is no exception. So last year in December, Uber signed a deal with the Indian Coast Guard. In September this year, they signed another deal, this time with the Indian Navy. And in the following month came a third deal, this with the Indian Air Force. So 3 deals within the span of a year, and their goal was the same: to provide transportation solutions to military personnel and their families, or, as per the agreement, to provide reliable, convenient, safe and economical travel services. As wordy and ideal as the plan sounds, it's being scrapped now. The Air Force, Navy and Coast Guard have initiated the process to end their agreements with Uber. This is being done as a precautionary step after a huge backlash. As soon as they were signed, the agreements raised alarm in India. They sparked outcry on social media, and critics pointed to major security issues, like the potential exposure of sensitive data. Critics claim that Uber will be able to access travel details and personal information of the users. While these are only risks, experts say that with this deal, sensitive data could be compromised. And they cite 2 reasons behind their fears. First, such deals are not a common phenomenon. Military bodies rarely sign contracts with a foreign private organization for a personal cab service. So, there's no real way to learn about the necessary guardrails. However, history does teach lessons from similar examples, which brings us to the second point. Data sharing deals between military bodies and private organizations can have grave consequences. Like when the US signed a deal with Strava, the popular fitness tracking application. Strava was used by active duty military personnel. The app tracked their movements and life patterns. This applied to military personnel in conflict zones like Afghanistan and intelligence officers in covert operations. This was highly sensitive classified military information. But thanks to Strava in 2018, the information leaked and it turned into a security nightmare for the United States. This is not to say that history would have repeated itself with Uber, but the lesson is clear. When it comes to sensitive data, especially in the context of a nation's military, the risks of exposure will always outweigh the benefits. Because national security should never be taken for a ride.
And finally, it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. A desert in Saudi Arabia receives snowfall and hail for the first time in history. Residents flee to shelters as an Indonesian volcano continues to spew ash. And robot dogs patrol Trump's Mar-a-Lago as US ramps up security at his residence. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1960, John F. Kennedy was elected as the 35th US president. At the age of 43, he was in fact and remains the youngest elected president. He was also the first Catholic to hold the post. Kennedy was in power until 1963 when he was assassinated. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching.
in this room and across the country are united together in our devotion to this country. We wish to keep it strong and we wish to keep it free.
كلش مختفي شوف لا اله الا الله. يوم السبت 30/4 العمل.
Thank you.